I'm actually using the chatbots to help write.
Chatbots, ChatGPT?
ChatGPT, Bing stuff, and Google. For me, I've always had problems making that first draft.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a killer.
Yeah, and I know the feeling.
You know the feeling. I find it helpful in making the first draft.
How do you prompt it? What would be an example approach?
All different ways. And that's, I've been collecting this. And here's the thing about
your book of
this.
spells.
Yes. Here's the thing about it is that this is an important lesson about technology is that we have to use it to figure it out. There's something I call thinkism, which is this reliance on trying to solve problems by thinking about them, which is very appealing to people who like to think. Okay? And you can only go so far with thinkism because all the things we're discovering about this, none of the inventors of this had any idea that they could be used this way.
That's cool.
Right? And so we're discovering, we collectively, by using it, are discovering its capabilities and eventually its harms. But that's important because this is how we steer the things. And so the problem with trying to prohibit or turn it off or ban it is that you don't get to steer then, going back to that metaphor. So right now through use, we're uncovering all these things. And I've been trying to track how people are actually using them. And like, for instance, chat. So here's the thing. These chat models, basically what they generate are wisdom of the crowd kind of knowledge. Mm-hmm. The wisdom of the crowd was very famous, counting the jelly beans, right? Like if you average all the attempts by humans to count the number of jelly beans in a bottle, the best guess, the most accurate was kind of like the average of them. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're getting with the chat. It's taking everything that's written, the plus and the minuses, the geniuses and the jerks, and it's averaging out. And that's what it's giving you is kind of an average. So most of the content generated by the chats is sort of broadly correct, very kind of average, very kind of bland. And a lot of what you're doing with the intern is kind of pressing them. So one of the tricks is that you can ask for it to be a little bit snarkier or more professional.
So let's say you're starting tabula rasa. Right. Idea popped into your head in the shower. Okay, I want to give a rough draft a shot. What is the step number one, step number two?
So it depends. I might ask it to do a summary of what's known about this. Tell me everything it knows about it. Write a first draft with bullets, with 5 bullet points.
Could you give a real example? An example you might use?
I'm trying to think of the last one I did.
How the Egyptians influenced Roman architecture. I don't know, making that up.
Exactly, right. You could do that. Give me the 5 bullet points and stuff. And then you could say, you could have questions about some parts you didn't understand, or like expand this bullet one, citing more sources, or give me an example of a day in the life for this, or 10 more examples of how this might play out. You could kind of expand it that way. You could also shrink it in terms of like summarizing, making bullet points, or what's the key takeaway? Or how about if I wanted to have like a teachable moment out of this? And so you would have all these kinds of things flowing around. And then again, it's the intern at work. It's like good, but you're not going to use it. You're probably wind up rewriting it. It's maybe give me some ideas I didn't have, or maybe the structure of how it organized it was, that's pretty good for 4 of them. And so it's a start. And for me,
it gets you past the breath hold of the empty page.
Right. For me, this is really big. It's just getting going. And then you can also use it later on. I have a friend who writes scripts, and they do, show me all the weak plot points in this. Or
could you explain that?
You put the script in, and they'll say, what are some of the contradictory plot points?
That's a great use.
Right. Just, kind of like,
thinking about my fiction, you can find internal inconsistencies.
Internal inconsistencies, or where's continuity broken, or things like that. Here's something I used. My book, which we'll get to, my publisher asked for talking points. So I said, make a list of 9 talking points for this book.
Time Machine, number 1.
For this book.
Woolly Mammoth, number 2. I'm kidding.
And it made a good list. Again, I couldn't really use the list, but I could use it to make the list.
A starting point.
It was a starting point. And here's another thing. So I have a friend who has a blog, a daily blog. They generate 40 posts a day.
Okay, I can probably guess it is.
Probably would guess it is.
I was like, that's a lot of posts.
Yeah. It's 40 a day. So they use it to help write headlines. They'll give the thing and say, give me 5 headlines.
Now, I've actually not used, say, ChatGPT for this. There's an upload function where you can upload your document and then use that as the basis or part of the basis for the prompt.
Yeah, write some headlines. It says it's really, really good with suggesting something that they hadn't thought of. Or he said also sometimes I'll give it the little posting and said, give me a great punchline at the end.
That's cool.
And again, it's the intern, they're bad, pretty good.
It's going to give you something, though.
Give you something to start with.
I'll give you an example from my own life just for fun. A friend of mine suggested this because he sent me a text. He said, this is pretty interesting. And he used ChatGPT. He's been exploring all these tools in great depth. Right. And I've played with a lot of them, but not in the depth that he has. And he had suggested a podcast guest, John Vervaeke, who was on not too long ago. And he simply put in a prompt along the lines of, what are questions that Tim Ferriss might ask John Vervaeke on his podcast in the style of Tim Ferriss? Right. And they weren't perfectly polished, but they were not bad.
Right, exactly.
And
not bad is, I think, the title. I mean, if that's what we're talking about. It's a not bad intern. Okay?
Right.
It's the not bad interns.